Time keeps its own secrets in the spaces between seconds where precision becomes predator. The ticking was Elena's lullaby. 24 timepieces filled her repair shop with their gentle percussion, each marking seconds in their own rhythm. She'd grown to love the chaos of it. Pocket watches chattering against grandfather clocks, cuckoo clocks punctuating the symphony with their wooden announcements. It was past midnight, but Elena preferred the solitude. No customers, no interruptions. Just her, the tools, and time itself. She adjusted her magnifying lamp over the 1920s Elgin she'd been restoring for 3 weeks. The mainspring had snapped, and finding an authentic replacement had taken longer than expected. But Elena didn't believe in shortcuts. Precision demanded patience. The familiar weight of her tweezers felt comforting as she guided the delicate spring into position. Around her, the shop's collection continued its irregular heartbeat. Mrs. Chen's mantel clock with its slightly fast tempo. The Victorian pocket watch that ran 2 minutes slow. The Swiss movement that clicked just a fraction louder than the others. Elena knew each voice in the mechanical choir. That's why she noticed when the harmony changed. It started with the antique wall clock near the window, a Baroque piece with Roman numerals that she'd never quite managed to regulate properly. Its tick had always been slightly rushed, a nervous flutter among the steadier voices. But now it was different. Not faster or slower, but wrong. Each tick seemed to hang in the air a moment too long, as if the sound itself was struggling to keep pace. Elena set down her tweezers and listened. The wrongness was subtle, like a musician playing just slightly off-key in an orchestra. She approached the wall clock, running her fingers along its mahogany case. The pendulum swung in its familiar arc, but something in the mechanism's voice had shifted. She opened the case and peered at the movement. Everything appeared normal, gears meshing smoothly, pendulum rod straight, weights properly positioned. Yet that odd hesitation remained in each tick, as if the clock was waiting. Just needs adjustment, she murmured to herself. The brass lever moved easily under her touch, but instead of correcting the timing, something else happened. The shop fell silent. Not completely. The other clocks still ticked, but their voices had changed. Where before each timepiece had maintained its individual rhythm, now Elena could hear them listening to each other. The pocket watches seemed to pause mid-tick. The grandfather clock's deep chime resonated longer than usual. Even the electric wall clock above her workbench, which had hummed steadily for 15 years, now pulsed with an uncertain heartbeat. Elena's hand froze on the regulator. In 30 years of clockwork, she'd never heard anything like this. Timepieces didn't communicate. They couldn't influence each other. Yet as she stood there, barely breathing, she could swear she heard them, adjusting. One by one, the clocks began to find a new rhythm together. And Elena realized, with a chill that had nothing to do with the October air seeping through the shop's old windows, that she hadn't started this synchronization. Something else had. The synchronization wasn't random. Elena could hear the pattern emerging as she backed away from the Baroque clock, her tools scattered on the workbench, forgotten. The timepieces were finding a common tempo, but it wasn't natural. It was too perfect, too deliberate. Tick, tick, tick. The sound built like approaching thunder. What had started as 24 individual voices was becoming something else, a unified percussion that seemed to fill not just the shop, but the space inside Elena's skull. She pressed her palms to her ears, but the rhythm penetrated deeper than hearing. She tried to focus on her work, returning to the Elgin's delicate mainspring. But her hands moved differently now. Each twist of the tweezers, each careful adjustment, fell into step with the mechanical chorus surrounding her. When she reached for a screwdriver, her fingers tapped against the workbench. Tap, dot, tap, tapped. Perfectly in time. Stop it, she whispered, but her own voice seemed to pulse with the rhythm. The worst part wasn't the sound, it was the time. Elena had always been acutely aware of duration, able to estimate elapsed minutes within seconds of accuracy. But now, the intervals felt wrong. She glanced at her watch, 12:47 a.m. She worked on the mainspring, completely absorbed, then looked again. 12:48 a.m. 1 minute. But it felt like she'd been working for 20. She set the Elgin aside and walked the length of her shop, counting the steps. 43, as always. But each footfall landed precisely on the unified tick echoing from the walls. She tried to break the rhythm, to step off beat, but her feet refused. They found the tempo automatically, as if the sound was guiding her movement from within. The clocks watched her with their blank faces. No, that was ridiculous. Clocks didn't watch, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling that every dial, every hand, every numbered hour was tracking her movement through the shop. When she passed the grandfather clock, its pendulum seemed to swing in perfect time with her heartbeat. Her heartbeat? Elena stopped walking and pressed her hand to her chest. The pulse beneath her palm matched the ticking exactly. Not approximately, exactly. As if her heart had abandoned its biological rhythm and submitted to the mechanical precision surrounding her. Panic fluttered in her chest, but even that felt metered, controlled. She tried to run to the front door, but her legs moved in careful, measured steps. Each stride landed on a tick, each breath aligned with the pendulum's arc. She reached for the door handle and froze. Her watch read 1:15 a.m. How was that possible? She'd been working since midnight, walking around the shop, checking the clocks. It should have been nearly 2. But according to every timepiece in the shop, and she could see a dozen faces from where she stood, barely an hour had passed. Time was bending around her. Elena turned back to survey her shop, and the unified ticking grew louder. The sound wasn't just mechanical anymore. It had weight, presence. It filled the spaces between her thoughts, synchronized her breathing, measured her fear in precise intervals. And in that moment of terrible clarity, Elena understood that she was no longer alone in her shop. Something had been waiting in the clockwork, patient as a wound spring. Something that understood precision better than she ever could. Something that had been listening to her work, night after night, learning the rhythm of her obsession. Now it was teaching her a new tempo, whether she wanted to learn or not. The ticking became everything. Elena stood paralyzed in the center of her shop as 24 timepieces beat in perfect unison. The sound didn't just fill the space, it displaced the air itself. Each tick pushed against her eardrums, her ribs, the spaces between her thoughts. The silence between beats felt infinite, pregnant with mechanical anticipation. Tick, Naya. Tick, tick. Her heart hammered against the rhythm, fighting to maintain its own pace. But with each passing second, the biological rebellion grew weaker. The synchronized percussion was winning, dragging her pulse into alignment like a metronome training a stubborn musician. She tried to move toward the door, but her feet betrayed her. Each step fell exactly on a tick. When she attempted to rush, her legs simply wouldn't respond between beats. During the silence, she was frozen. During the sound, she could move, but only in perfect time. The clocks were no longer keeping time. They were creating it. Elena's breathing matched the rhythm now. In on the tick. Hold during the silence. Out on the next tick. She fought against it. Tried to gulp air frantically, but her lungs had submitted to the mechanical precision. Even her blinks fell into step. Tick. Blink. Tick. Dot. Dot. Tick. Breathe. She was becoming clockwork. The realization sent ice through her veins, but even her fear was measured now. Terror in 4/4 time. Panic with perfect tempo. Her thoughts fragmented into tick-sized pieces, each idea precisely timed, mechanically delivered. Tick. She had to get out. Tick. The door was 20 feet away. Tick. But she could only move when allowed. Tick. The rhythm owned her now. Elena raised her hand toward the workbench, reaching for something, anything, that might break the synchronization. But her arm moved like a clock hand, smooth and inevitable. Her fingers opened and closed with metronomic precision. The shadows in the shop seemed to pulse with the ticking. Light from her desk lamp fell in measured intervals, creating a strobing effect that made the clock faces appear to shift and breathe. The Baroque clock's Roman numerals seemed to crawl around its face. The grandfather clock's pendulum swung wider than physics should allow, and Elena understood, with crystalline mechanical clarity, that she was no longer looking at ordinary timepieces. They were looking at her. Every dial face had turned in her direction. Every hour hand pointed toward her frozen form. Even the stopped clocks, the broken ones she hadn't yet repaired, showed the same impossible time. The exact moment she'd first adjusted the Baroque clock's regulator. The moment she'd invited this presence in. Tick, tick, tick. No, the sound was inside her now. In her bloodstream, her nerve endings, the electrical impulses firing between neurons. She wasn't just moving to the rhythm, she was the rhythm. A human mechanism wound too tight, spring tension building toward a release that might never come. Elena tried to scream, but her voice emerged in perfect tempo. Each syllable fell on a tick. Even her terror had been quantified, measured, regulated. The clocks watched with their eyeless faces as their newest component integrated into the system. Time had found its most devoted servant, and Elena realized, in that final moment of human consciousness, before the synchronization completed, that precision had always been her god. Now it was claiming her soul. Tick, tuck, tick, tick. The sledgehammer felt impossibly heavy in Elena's hands, but desperation gave her strength. She lifted it above the Baroque clock, that ornate mechanical prison that had started everything. For a moment, she hesitated, 30 years of reverence for Clockwork screaming against the destruction. Then she brought the hammer down. The clock exploded in a shower of springs, gears, and splintered wood. The unified tick that had controlled her breathing, her heartbeat, her very thoughts, fractured into chaos. Suddenly she could move freely, think clearly, breathe without mechanical permission. The other timepieces continued their synchronized rhythm for several seconds, then gradually fell back into their individual voices. The grandfather clock's deep chime, the pocket watch's nervous chatter, the familiar, beautiful chaos she'd always loved. Elena stumbled toward the door, her legs shaking with released tension. But as she reached for the handle, she heard something that made her freeze. Ticking. Not from the shop's collection. From her wrist. She looked down at her watch, a simple Timex she'd worn for 15 years. The second hand moved in perfect mechanical precision. Nothing unusual about that. Except the ticks were too loud, too clear, and perfectly, impossibly regular. Elena stepped outside into the October air, locking the shop behind her. But the ticking followed. It seemed to emanate from every direction, street lamps pulsing in rhythm, her footsteps falling into mechanical time, even her car's turn signal blinking with clockwork precision. She drove home through empty streets, but couldn't escape the awareness that everything around her was keeping time. Traffic lights changed in mathematical intervals. Her windshield wipers beat against the glass like a metronome. The radio played songs that seemed to align with an underlying temporal grid. At home, Elena tried to sleep, but rest was impossible. She could hear clocks throughout her apartment, the microwave, the coffee maker, the heating system cycling on and off. Devices that had never seemed to tick before now announced their mechanical presence with crystal clarity. By morning, she'd developed a new habit. Every few minutes, she found herself checking her watch. Not because she needed to know the time, but because something inside her required confirmation that the seconds were passing correctly. The intervals had to be perfect. The precision had to be maintained. Days passed, then weeks. Elena tried to return to work, but couldn't focus on anything except timing. When customers spoke, she found herself counting the syllables, measuring the pauses between words. When she walked, each step had to fall on an internal beat that never stopped. She began setting multiple alarms, checking them obsessively against atomic time sources. She downloaded apps that displayed time down to the millisecond. She bought mechanical watches, digital watches, smart watches, surrounding herself with temporal precision like armor against chaos. But it was never enough. The entity that had possessed her shop hadn't been destroyed. It had been transplanted. It lived in her now, a parasitic consciousness that fed on her need for perfect timing. And the more she fed it, checking clocks, counting seconds, measuring intervals, the stronger it grew. Sometimes, late at night, Alina could swear she heard other timepieces responding to her presence. Clocks in neighboring apartments synchronizing. Car alarms in the parking lot finding a common rhythm. The city itself slowly, imperceptibly, beginning to tick in unison. She'd escaped the shop, but she hadn't escaped the synchronization. She'd become its carrier. And time, patient as always, continued its perfect mechanical march towards something Elena was afraid to imagine. Tick, tick, tick.